I'm here with Tom Bangemann, Vice President of Business Transformation at the Hackett Group. Tom, you've just taken part in the G8 panel here in Edinburgh at the Shared Services and Outsourcing Week. There was a lot of discussion about the maturity of the outsourcing sector. What's your comment on that from Hackett's perspective, Tom? What do you think we'll be seeing, and what could we expect to see from the outsourcing provider side in the coming years?
I think it's interesting to put maybe the maturity of the outsourcing business also in perspective with the captive market. Now, let's remember that the captives have been around probably about 20 years. The outsourcing business maybe 10 years in Europe, not really more than maybe 6 to 8 years. However, if you look at the performance of the outsourced versus the captive centers today, then we're not finding too much difference anymore. So while, according to our data, we can't say one is better than the other, we have to recognize that we have two groups who are more or less on the same level currently in terms of performance, although one's been doing this 3 times as long as the other. So that tells us that the outsourcing group is running fast, they're learning fast, and since it's an industry, they have to be better in the long run. So I think from a maturity point of view, we're sort of on equal terms currently. From an outlook point of view, I think the captives probably have to make sure that they stay on top of what they're doing and keep up with the speed that the outsourcers are currently utilizing. So I think while we still have 80 to 90% of people doing captives and 10 to 20% of people doing outsourcing, depending on whether you count cost, budgets, FTEs, or things like that, it's going to shift, and we have now this situation where outsourcing is obviously real and it's taken seriously, and people are really comparing those options. And I think it's shifting a little bit also from what it used to be sort of black and white religious discussion about good and bad and things like that, where currently it's just simply 2 sourcing options. And it makes a lot of sense for most captives to start thinking about at least what we call selective outsourcing. And this is where we see, for example, one of the major trends currently in outsourcing at least bits and pieces, for example, a process, or within a country, the activities, or within a business unit or region, just start with something. So typically European way of doing things anyway, piloting, putting your toe in the water and just testing it.
So you think that's where the growth potential is, in this selective outsourcing?
I think it's in both areas, but what we're seeing currently is that the selective outsourcing is growing significantly more than the large deals. And I think it's simply because of the way that people would normally approach these things. I mean, you don't just quickly outsource your whole finance and accounting activities. So you would typically test it. And I think maybe for Europeans, the selection of the partner and the list of criteria behind that is maybe a bit more critical, or they are a bit more critical about it than maybe in other parts of the world, where they might look at wage arbitrage and the cost more than all the other criteria. So I think the balance of these things is slightly different.
Tom, you mentioned in the G8 panel earlier today that today in Europe there are more multifunctional shared services than single shared services. What can we deduce from this? Where are companies in their own maturity cycle, if that is the case?
That's quite an interesting finding. I mean, we've been tracking this for about 15 years now, and it's really the first time ever that out of those, we've got about 1,600 shared services in Europe. I mean, there's a huge amount of them.
Captive shared services?
Yeah, captive shared services. And it's about 2/3 in Western Europe and 1/3 in Eastern Europe. That's the current situation of the landscape. And when you look at all of these shared services, then we've, for the first time, as you say, got the situation where the majority of these includes activities for more than one function. So 77% started with finance. So most of them started with finance, and they have now added at least one more function. And to us, this aligns very nicely with some other trends, for example, the end-to-end processing idea. And we know this from all the performance metrics, that if you really want to improve your process, then you have to look at it sort of from an end-to-end point of view. Now, you can always have this discussion on detailed level about what do you mean by end-to-end? You know, where does it start, where does it end? But what it does mean by definition is cross-functional. And that means that if I'm running a multifunctional center, so for example, finance and procurement activities, I can actually look at a purchase-to-pay process instead of just running a payables activity and maybe having some other group run a purchasing activity. So you really can align those things. And the benefits from aligning those things, those are the real benefits. And it's not an imagination, it's real measured benefits. So it's not surprising companies are doing that because they're doing what makes sense. Mm-hmm. But now we're sort of tilting over to that point in time where actually the majority is doing that. It doesn't yet cover all the activities, all the business units, all the companies, you know, so there's a lot of scope still to be added. You can still roll out these things. But just the mere fact that the majority is already utilizing this type of activity is a very, very strong trend. So we feel this is going to increase the maturity level, obviously. It's going to increase the performance level significantly. And if they can combine this now with increasing the automation levels, which is the one sort of big problem, if you want, hanging in there. Everybody knows technology is key. Everybody knows automation is what we need in transactional processes. But the reality is that while we do a little bit something on it, it's not really on the level it should be. And in numbers, it just means that, you know, transactional processes typically are automated to 20 to 40%. So 20 to 40% of a process is actually running within the machine, and the rest we're still doing something like this. Mm-hmm. Right? World-class companies have double the automation levels. Now, it's an easy exercise in math to think about what that means when you've got double the automation level. It's not exactly double the productivity, but, you know, it does have a significant impact on it. And then, based on that, the discussion about wage arbitrage, my whole service delivery model can be completely different. So I think there's a huge opportunity in doing that. And, you know, originally when shared services were set up, for example, here in the UK, where we're now, I mean, this country's got 370 shared service centers, the biggest number in any country in Europe. Mm-hmm. And the base logic at the time, obviously, was we can get some of these benefits by increasing productivity levels. And the key to increase productivity levels is automation. But it's been done in some cases very well, but in most cases we're still lagging behind what it could be. So there is huge potential to do it. And my advice also to the centers who are still located in Western Europe, those 2/3, is, you know, either you need to really embrace this, otherwise there's only the wage arbitrage option. In the long run, it's probably a combination of both. But in terms of the order of things, there's still potential to increase productivity in existing sites if you just do more automation.
Tom Bangemann, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.